Hey everyone, today's guest is the founder of M2 Performance Nutrition. He is the nutrition coach for more than 40 CrossFit Games athletes. He has a PhD from Dartmouth College, and he is also the Power Monkey Camp nutrition expert, the one and only Mike Molloy. Mike is one of the most knowledgeable and caring coaches I've ever met. We go into some really interesting topics on the nutrition side of things, and I think you guys are going to love this podcast. Let's get into it. So, Mike, what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing well, Dave. Thanks for asking. Life is pretty good these days.
I can imagine. It's good to have you on. We were going
Yeah, good to be
through
here.
the credential list, the things that you kind of put down here, notable facts about yourself, and one kind of jumped out at me.
Sure.
I want to kind of bring it up right away, and probably has nothing to do with your industry, but it says you are an incredible Top Gun fan. Is that true?
You- Oh, absolutely. I was introduced to Top Gun when I was very young. I was born in 1981, and so like the height of the 80s and Dolby Surround, sound came out, and my dad got big into that movie, and so I think I've watched that movie in excess of 100 times. So
Well, I think we're just going to make the
Nice.
podcast about Top Gun now because if you're aware, if you're that big of a fan, Top Gun 2 or Maverick, Top Gun Maverick is coming up pretty soon. Did you see the preview for that thing?
Oh, I've seen the previews for it. Yeah, we're like me and my cousin. We're gonna like rent out a theater and everything else. Come like debut time. It's gonna be a whole thing. Got my flight suit ready. I'm good to go.
I watched the
Nice, nice.
preview.
And
Go ahead,
What's
Chad.
that?
I was gonna say I believe that Mike probably does have a flight suit. I believe that of you.
I
I'm just
think
hoping
you
that
got
I'm
to be
not.
Maverick at our Power Monkey Camp party next camp in the spring. You have
Oh
to show
yeah.
up as Maverick on that Friday night.
It's pretty easy. You just wear some aviators and like flex your jaw excessively every time you think about anything, and then you can imitate Maverick from Top Gun. You're good to go.
I watched that preview and I was like, this is the exact movie, just
Yeah.
30 years later. And I was
Hey.
like, I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I'm going. I'm going.
Yeah, of
Absolutely.
course. 100%.
100%. So yes, I'm glad we're on the
Well,
same
I'm
page with our movie choices.
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
I'm definitely going, but I'm a little bit scared too because I don't want to be disappointed. I don't want it to taint the first one
Oh, I know.
any at all for me.
I
But
hear you.
yeah, Mike, though I think you would have been a great Top Gun. I really do. I think you've got the smarts and even the look for it for sure. You fell into nutrition and kind of getting right into the questions. And although it's very hard to follow up a Top Gun question, we'll get into it anyway. But you're a nutritionist, and I love to look at the guests that are coming on. I love to look at their websites and really see what sticks out
Hmm.
and what is really at the forefront of your website or those websites. And for yours, it states specifically a personalized approach to nutrition coaching. So I want to ask you some questions on that.
Sure.
But another thing that really stuck out to me is it specifically says that you want to help people perform at home, perform at work, perform in the gym,
Yeah.
and perform in life. And so I think when people see into performance,
Right.
it's really can indicate to them that it's about them performing physically, like in CrossFit or weightlifting or whatever other sport that they're trying to do. But you're stating that you want to help them in other areas. And so those performing at home and work and those other ones that I named off, I wondered if those are in any certain order of priority for you from your perspective.
It's a great question. Yeah. So, my my work really got started helping athletes. And so, the title M2 Performance Nutrition was an easy one to kind of come by. But over time, as people have kind of found us from different avenues or as athletes have moved into different parts of their life, we've diversified. And at the end of the day, all nutrition comes down to basically helping people align their action with their goals. And so, as somebody comes and says, hey, I'm not a top athlete, but I still, looking for help. It's like, yeah, of course we can help you. And so, you know, whether that's with, let's say, something like finding more energy to be a better mom or dad, or sometimes it's aligning their health so that they actually have a chance of getting, pregnant more easily, or something like that. All of those things kind of are encapsulated within the approaches that we do, the approaches that we try to take. And so it's hard for me to say what's a top priority, but I would say, helping people align their actions with their goals is sort of the end game thing that we try to provide people. And the ultimate goal is sort of to probably just create intrinsic happiness, right? Like at the end of the day, if I can make somebody happy by, having a better relationship with food, or making them feel a little bit more comfortable when they're, in gym clothes, or by going to the CrossFit games, then that's a win in my book.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that kind of priority that you laid out there for us. And interesting statistic to me was you mentioned that 70% of your clients are actually just looking to get healthy, not necessarily in CrossFit, or maybe they're in CrossFit too, but certainly not necessarily
Right.
looking to go to the CrossFit games, as you mentioned.
Right.
And that's the thing, is probably around about the percentage of CrossFit athletes that are in CrossFit. Probably the percentage is higher than that, actually, that are just in CrossFit to be healthier. And of course, a big part of that is nutrition as well. And
Right.
um, so personalized. I wonder if you can define what personalized means to you when you state that on your website. And one of the things that is easy to say that you personalize for is that CrossFit Games level athlete that wants to compete to the best of their ability.
Right.
So it's easy to kind of say, okay, these are the things that you need to do. This is the time that you need to eat and stuff like that. And I think that you told us a story, or I want you to tell us a story. I haven't heard the story yet of a time that really um, it was a learning opportunity for you when you realized that CrossFitters need to be fueled by more carbs.
Sure.
Can you tell us that story about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So really quick, what does personalized nutrition mean to me? I think everybody is a little bit unique. We're all kind of snowflakes, as I like to say. And so at the end of the day, you might have two, 145-pound, 5'4" females that exercise for an hour a day in the gym. And if you plug that into an app or an online calculator, they might throw out the same sort of nutritional approach. But let's say one of those people is coming from, a place where they've been, massively under eating, maybe undergoing some binge, guilt, restriction cycles. And the other person is coming from a place where they've never actually paid attention to nutrition in their life. And so how do you go about, generating results in those people is actually a totally different approach. For one, you've got to sort of restore perhaps some metabolic health, some physical health, and get them to a place where they, are breaking this cycle of, feeling really guilty about decisions that they're making on weekends, and then, massively slashing their food intake during the weekdays. And the other person, it's just more so about education about, hey, what is a macronutrient? How much protein should I put on a plate, and things like that. So that's kind of what personalized nutrition means to me. Now, when you kind of apply that in general to the CrossFit community, and maybe even broader to sort of the more active fitness community overall, I entered the nutrition scene when there was sort of a little bit of a fear around carbohydrates. Paleo was really at its sort of its height. And that's not necessarily a low carb approach, but a lot of people sort of have interpreted it that way. And, I think if you look at CrossFit 12 years ago, Monday might have been 5x5 back squat. Tuesday was maybe a 20-minute workout like Cindy or something like that. Maybe Wednesday was, row 5K. And now, Monday might be 5x5 back squat, followed by a 20-minute AMRAP. Let's do some accessory work, and then we'll call it quits and get home. And so, the world has changed. The programming has changed, even for your sort of baseline, 70% client. And in that situation, it was my opinion, going through literature and reading about as close as I could find to studies that kind of looked at high intensity training, that people would be, one, better fueled for their performance with increased carbohydrate intake, and then two, their bodies would recover better, maybe handle the stress response of that training better in a carbohydrate rich environment. And so I'm not the only one by any stretch of the imagination, with this sort of message or agenda, but, putting this out there and, like the mid 2010s, so 2015 was definitely sort of a different concept at the time.
And what was the response like? I mean, if you're in there coaching these athletes and recommending these things that are looked at as
Yeah.
maybe different than what's already out there, what was the response initially, and has that changed over the course of the past 5 years or so?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, my first elite athlete, just to kind of give a perspective, was Tasia Persevich, CrossFit Mayhem now, relatively household name within the CrossFit community. And Tasia came to me from a gymnastics background, a lot of issues around food due to some poor nutritional coaching earlier in her life, and she's talked about those publicly and stuff. So that's all out there. And so I said, we're gonna ramp your carbohydrate up, intake up quite a bit here. We're gonna do it slowly over time, and we're gonna work on this together. And I definitely felt like there was a sense of fear in her mind, like, oh my God, I'm gonna blow up, I'm gonna get fat, carbs are bad for me. And the best way to make it past that is showing them, one, that they feel great, two, that performance is just like next level, and then three, gaining that trust that you're willing to listen, you're willing to adjust as they go through moments when, things aren't feeling great. And so that's exactly what happened with Tasia. We worked up slowly. I think she, podiumed at like 3 of the major competitions that year, including Guadalajara Granite Games and East Coast Classic, which was another big comp back then. And so that really helped. But like, if Tasia was on this right now with us, she'd say, oh my God, I still have moments of weakness. I still have moments where I feel like I'm eating too much, even though I know in my heart that I'm not. Now, has that changed? A little bit, yeah. I think athletes are getting the message that they need to fuel their bodies. And so that's probably nowhere more prevalent than in the younger teenage athletes. So, they come in and I ask them to eat, 350, 400 grams of carbohydrates, and they don't blink. They say, is this going to make me perform better? And I say, yep. And they say, okay, let's do it. And so I don't know if it's just because they're younger and they haven't been brainwashed by society as much, but there's definitely still issues that we have to work through, but it's getting better and it's changing every day.
So just on the topic of carbs real quickly, I mean, not all carbs are created equal, right? I mean, if you're recommending an intake of increased carbs, it doesn't mean like, all right, sweet, let's go and get that Wonder Bread and just, pack it on. You know what I mean? Like, I think being a little more specific as to what those carbs can and should look like. Can you give some examples if you're recommending carbs to these athletes and saying, okay, you should be increasing by this much? What would you normally recommend in terms of what those carbs should look like?
Right. So it's a great comment and a great question, Dave. So I think at the end of the day, if you've got somebody that's training, 3, 4, maybe 5 days a week for 45 minutes to an hour a day, most of their carbohydrates should come from all natural sources: fruits, veggies, potatoes, squashes, things like that. When you start to ramp up your training and your intensity, there's going to come a point where you just can't eat another freaking potato. Like you're like, I'm done with these things. I want no more, but I still need to get some carbs in. What do I do? And so in that situation, we're going to recommend denser carbohydrate sources, but with some caveats. So our typical go-to ones are things like white rice, oatmeal, as sort of the staples for people. Why? They tend to be very low inflammatory, so they're not going to cause any gastrointestinal distress in most people. Secondarily, like I was just saying, they're denser and they're easier to get down into the body. And so essentially, at the end of the day, what you can think about is sort of it's not an and or question. It's not a quantity or quality question. If you're an elite athlete, you need to have quality, carbohydrates in your diet. Again, fruits, veggies, squashes, sweet potatoes, things like that. And you need to have enough dense carbohydrate in addition to that, such that you're not spending literally every minute of every day either chewing or digesting food, which isn't going to go very well in your training sessions. So that's sort of, for an elite athlete, how we would adapt and say, eat more carbs. Yeah, it's not gummy bears and, Coke or soda, maybe I should say. It's smart approaches, timed around their workouts, using specific foods in addition to intake of high quality carbohydrates.
So with the people that you're working with, Mike, do you get some favorite misconceptions? I know I have some of my own, and just going through my own life and figuring out what works and wasn't work for my own self. Do you get misconceptions as to what, nutrition is all about from people? Examples of like bro science, things like that people claim to work but have no actual science behind it?
100%. Probably the most prevalent one, and this is not to make fun of people. This is literally, if you're out there and you're reading, magazines and stuff, you're like, I should eat 5 meals a day, right? It's going to stoke my metabolic fire. And sadly, no evidence that meal frequency, having 6 meals, 12 meals, 14 meals a day, does anything beneficial for your metabolism over time. So that's a really great one that's actually been disproven recently, getting away from these bro science ideas.
That one particularly,
It's
Mike, can we just touch on that one a little bit more?
yeah.
Because that seems completely contrary to what is prevalent now in terms of eating regime throughout the day, which is fasting. This idea
Yeah.
of, eating within a window instead of eating, smaller meals throughout the entire day, which was, taken as, the end all be all when it comes to meal planning. Now it's okay, let's fast
Right.
16 hours, eat within our 8 hour window or whatever it might be, your window. That's
Right.
completely changed, and now fasting has become kind of the thought process behind when you should be planning out
Right.
your meals.
So there's two different like sort of end goals there. So like this idea that was disproven, well, around having 5 to 6 meals a day was you're constantly kind of keeping your metabolic biology operating and going at a high level by having your digestive system going. This increases what's called the thermic effect of food and all this other stuff. And so that was their goal. So it didn't work, but let's just say that was their purpose. The purpose behind intermittent fasting, people kind of lose sight of this, I think. Intermittent fasting is designed from a health point of view, right? So the thought process is that if you go a certain amount of time without eating, your body is forced into this state called autophagy, where it's basically autophagy means self-eating, auto, self, phage, eat. And so in that situation, the cells, because they don't have any fuel coming in, start to break down like old proteins and use them as energy sources. And so this is thought to sort of be like a house cleaning within your cells. And so you can, apply this approach and say, if I can induce autophagy, I will have better metabolic health within my cells, and this will ultimately lead to a healthier, full organism overall. And so they were actually, two completely different sort of end goals that kind of had conflicting purposes to them at the end, at the start. So did I get at that question, Dave, a little bit?
Yeah, and your recommendation. I mean, I've been doing intermittent fasting for a while now, and I have found it to be very helpful for myself. I'm just curious
Mm-hmm.
what your thoughts are on it in terms of general population versus potentially applying it to like a
Right.
competitor.
So let's say general population. So in general, intermittent fasting for weight loss is no better or worse than any other type of diet out there, as long as calories are kept equal. Why it works is essentially you're cutting your eating window in half in a day, right? So 24 hours in a day, you're going to sleep roughly 8 of those, I hope. And so you've got 16 hours left. Typically, a fasting window is about 8 hours, 16 hours. So you have 8 hours to eat. It's hard to get down as much food in 8 hours as you can in 16 hours. And so you generally will tend to eat less food. And this is what ultimately leads to people losing weight. Um, so at the end of the day, a perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable protocol for weight loss in general population. For health, I think there's some really, really interesting studies. So most of them come from rodent work and sort of even simpler genetic species, where they put animals on sort of these fasted protocols. They have longer lifespans. They have better immune health, better metabolic health, better control of diabetes and things of that nature. So far, that has yet to really be replicated in humans, simply because it takes time. We don't know the answers to those yet. I will say that there's some really educated people in that fasting field that say the 8 hour window in a human, or excuse me, the 16-hour window in a human isn't long enough to induce some of those same effects that are taking hold in a rodent, because a mouse's metabolism just works so much faster than a human's. So, I know people that will do 2, 3, 4 day fasts a couple of times a year to induce this state, and go from there. Now, from a point of view of sort of an athletic population, intermittent fasting, some people love it. I talked with a relatively elite male CrossFitter. He said, I've been doing intermittent fasting. It's been great. I said, cool. Tell me more about it. He says, well, I'm actually eating more in this window because it reminds me that I have to actually go eat. And so I'm really conscientious about it. And I said, well, that's awesome. It's working for you. Crush it. But I think in general, for people that are training, 4 or 5 hours a day, it can be a little bit tricky, because there's a huge stress response associated with that training volume, especially within the world of functional fitness, CrossFit, and things of that nature. And so, at M2 in general, my thought process is, you want to have a post-workout fuel or meal that's designed to restore muscle glycogen, for one, and two, blunt or stop the stress response, which is a hormone called cortisol, that's specifically affected by blood glucose levels. And so if you finish training and then you can't eat for 3 more hours, you're potentially compromising your recovery for your additional training session later that afternoon, or potentially even the next day. And so it can work for some athletes. There are some athletes out there that absolutely love it, but in general, it's not a go-to place for us. We're going to be more focused on meal timing around training windows, as opposed to trying to optimize our health through an intermittent fasting approach.
Yeah, I think a lot of us at Power Monkey have been doing the intermittent fasting for a while. I think I've been doing it for about 5 years now. I overheard your lecture at the last camp, and you guys know how camp is. It's crazy. We don't get to really listen to each other as much as we'd like. But I heard you mention something about, and you laid it out here. The common fasting period is 16 hours. I thought you had mentioned something about 12 hours and some sort of research in that regard. Can you elaborate
Yeah,
on that a little bit?
for sure. So diving into this window, or this idea that fasting in humans takes longer than 16 hours, there's this sort of new field of research, or new terminology called time restricted eating. And so this thought process is that you have sort of a natural, rhythm to the genetic expression of a lot of proteins in your body, um, that kind of correlates to 24 hours. And so the thought process is that if you can time your eating into a certain window, there's metabolic advantages that will prevent you from moving into a disease state. And so, again, this was done most effectively in a rodent population, a really, really nicely done one, but they basically put these mice on a really high fat, high carb diet designed to get them obese, but they restricted their time eating into a specific window, in this case, overnight, because mice are nocturnal. Um, and what they showed was that there was a significant, sort of benefit for the metabolic health, for the weight gain of these mice. And then oddly enough, they actually ended up doing significantly better on basically sort of like a cardio test, for lack of a better word. They put them on a wheel and they just ran them until they couldn't run anymore. And the mice that were on this time restricted eating window did significantly better. And so how long can that window be? Anywhere from 9 to 12 hours was effective. Once they went beyond 12 hours, that they lost that effect. And what the other thing that was really cool was that they showed that if they did this only 5 days a week, and then on 2 days they let them kind of eat freely for those 2 days, they still maintained that beneficial effect. And so there's some really, really smart people out there that's saying, yeah, fasting is one thing that you may have to go way longer than 16 hours to get the beneficial health aspects from, but you can employ this time restricted eating of somewhere between 9 to 12 hours, get a lot of additional really nice health benefits too as well, both performance and health wise.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think my window of eating is probably closer to 9 or 10 hours, cheating away from that normal 8 and 16 anyway. So that's good. That's good to hear for sure. And especially being on this topic, it is a hot topic that we wanted to talk about. What is your end recommendation for people that want to try this, that for people that are already doing it? Is it 8 and 16, or is it something like that 9 to 12 window?
I typically start with 9 to 12, and just go from there and sort of see how people do and see how people feel with it. Some people love it, and I typically find that the more sort of controlled the rest of their life is, the better they're going to respond to it. So for somebody to want to experiment with intermittent fasting, I want to see that they have a good understanding of their dietary intake first off. So they're not trying to live in a calorie deficit. They don't have binge restrict, cycles to their diet. I want to make sure that they're sleeping really well. I want to make sure that their training is appropriate volume. And I want to make sure that their stretch management systems are solid and that they're in a good place. Because essentially, in my mind, if those four things aren't being taken care of first, you've got much bigger sort of pieces of the nutritional or health pie that you could put your energy into and have bigger impacts on your life. But once you have that, sort of taken care of and you want to try intermittent fasting, yeah, I would say start with 12 hours, which is really quite, relatively straightforward. Could be 6 to 6, and then start to back it off to maybe 10 hours and then 9 hours. And then ultimately, for a true, typical sort of online intermittent fasting protocol, getting it down to 8 hours and seeing how you feel, how you respond. And then ultimately, you should probably take some time and say, okay, this looks great. This is working for me. If it is, is this just because I've decided that I like intermittent fasting and it's the cool new thing to do and I've got a placebo effect going on? Or, if I come out of this, do I actually notice a physical difference? Do I start to perform worse? Do I have worse sleep, worse mood, things like that? So,
Do you have a particular diet regimen that you've kind of settled on for yourself? Do you use any of these fasting techniques? Anything that you find to be helpful for your own personal goals and training right now?
Yeah. So for me, I did try intermittent fasting for a while. I just really love breakfast, like a lot, and I like to eat relatively quickly upon waking up. Um, and so, I think it's a great approach for a lot of people. It did not end up working for me. I felt no significant benefit from it. So for my own personal dietary intake, my general thought process is relatively straightforward. So even though our company is based around macro tracking, I only track my macros once a week to kind of set my calibration of like, okay, do I still actually know what 4 ounces of chicken looks like? Typically, no. Typically, I start to think things are bigger than they should be.
Hmm.
But yeah, I generally try to follow an approach of relatively balanced protein, fat, and carb intake across 3 meals. And then I really hammer myself hard on post-workout nutrition. So, at this point, my training exists, or, primarily around a CrossFit session and then some rock climbing on the side of that. And so I found that if I don't really take care of having fast digesting carbohydrates immediately after my training, followed by a solid meal about an hour after that, then the rest of my day, like I'm a zombie, I'm useless. And so for me to have the health that I want, the body composition that I want, to eat the volume of food that I enjoy, and still be functional, I found that, 3 solid meals, a snack, and then really, really paying attention to post-workout nutrition is what I need to do. But yeah, nothing trendy or fancy like intermittent fasting.
Yeah, no, I think I'm just curious with regards to, because I found the same thing. I've had to test plenty of different types of diets and things like that, and different, what's in at the moment, and seeing what works best for me. But something like intermittent fasting or whatever else, how long of a period would you recommend someone testing something to see the benefits before they're like moving on to something else, or saying this either works or doesn't work? Does it take a week?
Yeah.
Does it take a month? Like, how long should you test something before you actually are expected to see the benefits?
Right. So let's kind of break that down into 2 different areas. So from a lifestyle point of view, you're going to know pretty quickly if intermittent fasting or keto or any of these other things are good or bad for you. Like, if you find that you just forget to eat or it's not working with your lifestyle, then like I would honestly bail pretty early on, because creating more stress from your diet is the exact opposite from what thing that you want to be doing. But from a biological point of view, typically what we want to see is somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks of really strict adherence to something before we start to make adjustments to that protocol. And so the reason for that is it just seems to take that amount of time for your body to adapt to a lot of these different situations. So let's say that you decide that you're coming from a paleo background, and you decide or a low carb background, maybe is a better way to say it, and that you're going to all of a sudden try to eat a more balanced approach of food. And this causes you to increase your carbohydrate intake, all healthy, plant-based, potatoes, vegetables, sweet potatoes. You decide to bring those back into your diet. The first week actually is probably going to feel not so good. And the reason for that is that if you don't eat a lot of carbohydrates in this instance, your body downregulates the production of these things called amylase, which are enzymes that break down carbohydrates. The thought process is, I'm not eating them, so why should I make them? But now you've reintroduced them into your body. And it takes somewhere between 7 to 14 days for your body to ramp up the production of those to where it should be. And so if you decide in the first 2 weeks this feels like crap, then you're probably not giving enough of a chance. And so from week 2 to 4, then you start to actually be able to say, okay, I've adapted to this. How am I feeling? Am I treating this the right way? Have I decided to incorporate carbs in the sense that I'm going to stick to whole foods? Or have I now mentally, checked off that list, and I've started to, move into the Lucky Charms aisle, and, because I feel like this freedom to eat whatever, quote, carbs I want. And all of that has to be taken into consideration when figuring out if a nutrition plan is working for you. There's the hardcore biology and the science side of it, which with my background, I absolutely love. But I think so many nutrition coaches out there lose sight of like what is realistically going to work for a person's personality type, for their social structure in their life, their family life. That can be hard, right? And so all that needs to be taken into account. And I don't think you can get a real answer in less than 30 days.
Fantastic. It's good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of changing the topic a little bit here. let's drop just a really big bomb. Have you seen the movie The Game Changers?
Yeah, I have. I have.
And and you know I'm going to ask what is your, kind of I guess we could talk about this probably for a couple hours, I'm
Oh, for
sure,
sure.
being with you. So what is kind of your quick take on that message?
So, can you be an elite athlete and be vegan? Absolutely. I think the movie tries to show that to the nth degree. We work with a lot of elite vegan athletes. I work with Sarah Sigma's daughter. She's fully vegan from an ethical point of view. And so the real question isn't can you be an elite athlete and be vegan? The appropriate question from that movie is being a vegan better for you if you want to be an elite athlete? And at the end of the day, the science really doesn't back up a lot of the statements that are in that movie. Um, like any production, there's an agenda behind it. I think it's really interesting for people to note that James Cameron made that movie, and he is a major, major investor in a vegan food company. Um, and so there are some conflicts of interests there that they don't talk about while hammering on sort of the traditional food pyramid industry. We could go down a large rabbit hole on this conversation, but to say that the movie is biased is probably being a bit kind. There's been some really great breakdowns of it, and I could point people in directions. We can put them in show notes and things like that if they want to read it. But I think at the end of the day, um, the two take-home messages for me was sort of like, yes, you can be an elite athlete and be vegan. I don't think that was controversial. And that two, the message that they put out there was protein, protein, protein. You don't actually need protein to be, or to perform at an elite level. I also agree with, and that they say, increase your carbohydrate intake if you're training a bunch. And I also agree with that. I think it's just sort of this all or nothing approach of saying that meat is going to cause you to be a worse athlete is where they kind of lose me. And I think a lot of the scientific community. If they had stopped and said, you should increase your intake of, vegetables and fruits and potatoes and things like that to a significant amount, and you don't need to eat nearly as much protein, I think that wouldn't have been controversial at all. And I think it would have been a really great message. But of course, it makes for a shitty movie if they do that. And so they wouldn't, it
Yeah,
wouldn't have
some
been
of
on
it
Netflix.
is being controversial, right? Some of it
Right.
is getting every single person to talk about it on their podcasts and on, in
Yeah.
newspaper.
Hmm.
That's part of kind of what they're probably trying to get across. That's why it's been in the media so much lately.
Right.
I found it to be rather interesting and obviously inflammatory in a lot of ways, and just trying to get people to get riled up on certain topics. Um,
Yeah. It's also
and
just a really well-made movie, right?
oh yeah,
Like it's visually
absolutely.
very pleasing. If you watch that, you're like, holy shit! Like I want to be a vegan. This looks
Yeah.
awesome.
Hmm.
Well,
You
I
know what I
mean, a
mean?
lot of
Because it's
people who
just
are vegan too eat like shit. I mean, just because you're vegan doesn't mean that you live a healthy lifestyle. I mean, vegan can be a terrible diet. I mean, it
so. I think
really
that's a
has to
great
do.
point. Like
Go ahead, Mike.
one really good example on that, Dave, is the plant burgers, right? The Impossible Burgers and things like that.
Right,
Like they're actually terrible for you. Like
right,
the ingredient list in there is it's like reading a chemical book, you know, and at the end of the day, like they're being put out there. It's like, oh, it's vegan, it's good for you, and man, it's not. Like it's really not. But if you just take a all or nothing sort of simplistic view on it, you're like, okay, well, it's vegan, I'm going to eat it, it's good for me. And I think that's kind of the point you were getting at.
Yeah, I don't think you can equate vegan with being healthy. That's just not the
Right.
case. And I
Right.
think, and I don't eat meat. I eat fish, but I haven't eaten meat for 6, 7 years, and some of it
Right.
has to do with just household. My wife doesn't eat meat, and so it's just been
Hmm.
a lifestyle change that we've kind of incorporated. But I can appreciate the fact that quality of food. If someone's going and hunting their food and eating meat at a very high quality, that's going to
Right.
be substantially more beneficial than someone saying they're eating a vegan diet that's made up of Oreos and whatever else that's completely processed. So to me, it's
Right.
quality of food. It's eating what a lot of people say, which I think you can probably agree upon, this idea of eating a predominantly plant-based diet, which does not mean that it
Hmm.
needs to be completely
Right.
vegan, and you can kind of parse in these other things. But I think you kind
Right.
of get lost in this idea that vegan means healthy, and I think that's just not the case.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I think at the end of the day, if anybody wants to make the choice to go down a vegan or vegetarian path or whatever pescatarian path, if it's for ethical reasons, like that, that's not my place to debate. That's not like, that's your personal opinion, and like that's a totally different ballgame. But if you want to argue what's the best, approach for my health, longevity, and or human performance, well, then we actually have to use data, right? We can't just talk about, well, case studies of, hey, I did this and I felt a lot better. It's like, well, if you went from eating a relatively crappy diet to incorporating a ton of vegetables and fruits into your body, well, no shit, right? Like, of course you felt better. Conversely, if you go from eating a relatively good diet and now you're hunting to try to find something to get protein in, and you're just slamming down protein shakes all day, well, did you really make a smart educational change for your health and performance there? And my answer would probably be no. And so those are two different topics, I think, in my mind.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm a little disappointed in Dave that he's talking bad about Oreos. I think we're gonna lose a lot of listeners due to that comment there, Dave. We may have to edit that out.
I did
But
have a
Exactly.
Pop-Tart yesterday. I have to admit, my
oh,
wife is pregnant right now, and there are Pop-Tarts in the house, and I had one, so I wouldn't mind an Oreo
that,
every now
Sure.
and then as well.
that's going to be
Same.
a new nightly meal for you, Dave. A good Pop Tart. Pop Tarts are delicious, that's for sure. But Mike, let's go to the complete other side of that, the carnivore side, just
Oh,
briefly here.
yeah.
Again, we can dig into this forever as well. But for those athletes, and really, I think there are a lot of athletes and a lot of just individuals in general that are seeing results and getting healthier from going to the extreme of carnivore. And maybe, you never know if those individuals are really holding to that 100% or not.
Right.
But do you think it's the actual carnivore diet that's doing that, or kind of like what we were saying with the vegan? It's the ones that are really in it and are committed to it. They're just eating or making better choices. Do you think that's a part of it, or is it the actual diet?
No, I think it's they're making better choices, and probably they removing something from their diet that was pissing their body off in the first place, right? And so, if they removed a ton of processed grains from their diet, we'll say as an example, by going to the carnivore diet, and now all of a sudden they feel 1,000 times better. Well, is it because they're eating substantially more meat, or is it because they removed, something that their body wasn't agreeing with in the first place? My gut reaction is that it would probably be the latter. Um, we've done a
Mhm.
lot of studies in the world of nutrition to figure out how much protein we really need. And from a health point of view, from an athletic point of view, um, the answer tends to be, not tends to be, it's pretty much, like, I hate to use the word proven, but supports the idea of about 1.8 grams per kilo of body weight, right? And so if you're let's just say 100-kilo male, that's 180 grams. Doesn't mean you can't eat more than that, but that's all you need. Anything beyond that is sort of like, it's fine, it's good, it's neither good nor bad for your body, but there's no benefit to going beyond it. And so for somebody to all of a sudden say that they feel significantly better on a carnivore diet, my gut reaction is it's probably due to something that they're no longer eating, more than the fact that they're only exclusively eating like a carnivore would.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. Something like carnivore, and actually did carnivore, meaning carnivore or mostly just red meat, cheese, and eggs, and also one or two beers every night. That was my version of
The
carnivore.
drunk
And
carnivore is what I heard.
yeah, exactly. But for me, the reason why I like that is because I love to eat meat. It's easy to do that, and it's easy to um, it makes my decision making a lot simpler. I don't
Hmm.
have to if we're going to go out and eat fast food or something like that or at a restaurant, I don't have to worry about anything the decision making process of it because I
Right.
know that I'm sticking to this specific meal plan right now. And so I think that's another thing that benefits people in regards to being on specific diets and everything else. But
Right.
talking about that beer that I have, and I do have one or two beers usually almost every night.
Sure.
I've always appreciated, Mike, your support on that, and what I mean by that is that you put out a post. I think it was New Year's Eve saying, "Hey, look, you guys are gonna go drink and have a good time, so please do that, but understand there's
Yeah.
some science behind it." So you called it
Right.
science-based boozing. Can you elaborate on that a little bit as well?
Yeah, for sure. So, I just think it's so unrealistic to think that people are not going to go out and be social, and that they're going to live like, monks and only eat either a vegan diet or a carnivore diet or a paleo diet. Like, they're going to do things that are, against that. And it's all about finding the right balance. Operating at extremes is a recipe for disaster. And so I'd rather give people the tools to go out and have a good time without it massively impacting their lives for, 48-hour hangovers. And so the short story behind this is that this group took a bunch of volunteers, and they gave them different diets before they got them wasted. And at the end of the day, they said the next day, how do you feel? And they did a couple of other analyses. And the best way to kind of handle your body's breakdown of alcohol turns out to be a high protein, high fiber diet before you go drinking. So basically what you need to do is combine the carnivore diet with game changers and a high fiber diet, all from, plant-based options. And then you can go have way more than your 2 beers per night, Chad, and it should make things better. The thought process is that, to make a really long story short, is it kind of like this high protein, high fiber diet delays what we call gastric emptying. So food ends up in your stomach and into your small intestine. And the process by which it's digested and then brought into your bloodstream is a little bit slower. And so you miss this massive spike in blood alcohol level, and therefore, hopefully on the backside, miss the hangover that comes as a result of it. So that's really oversimplification of why you feel less shitty the next day with the high fiber, high protein diet.
I think you just pissed Chad off because it was so close to being a perfect combo of saying meat and beer, I'm going to be good, and you threw in this fiber nonsense, and now he has to have a salad, and like, God, I can't do that.
Chad,
it's so close to perfection.
Chad, raspberries are like the highest fiber fruit out there, so I think you can eat like a bag of raspberries. So if you see Chad at next Power Monkey Camp, just like downing raspberries,
sure.
every
you know
night,
what's following it. You know what's following it. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, whether I ate raspberries or not, you know what's going to follow it. But this is a very important question for me, Mike, and I'm leaning on you to answer appropriately. For you, is it beer or wine?
Oh man, I like a high-end beer better than I like a high-end wine. I'm sorry, Dave. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But
I
live in New Hampshire, Vermont border, and we are literally surrounded by like 10 of the best beer, microbreweries in the entire world. And it's just so easy to get, and it's so cheap, and people drive from thousands of miles around, and they say, "Oh, Heady Topper, it's so amazing." And I'm like, "Yeah, we can have that tomorrow for breakfast if you want." Like, it's easy. And so I respect good wine, but just from a life ease point of view and what I've experienced more, it is beer.
Well, I thank you. I appreciate that. I do, because I lose to Dave Durante so often that I'll take any little win I can get. And honestly, I don't even know why I hang out with Dave or like him at all. He doesn't eat red meat. He doesn't like beer.
Not that I don't like beer. I mean, I can't even say that living in Portland now, which is like crazy beer city over there. But they do have their fair share of wine, which is more my preference when it comes to drinking. That's for sure.
Don't get me wrong. Wine's delicious, and if somebody's going to pour me a glass, I'm almost never going to say no. But yeah, if I had to choose, if you put a gun to my head, I'm going to go with a nice beer.
Fine.
Awesome.
Fine.
Yes, Mike, I will certainly.
Mike, anything in the research area right now that, I mean, with your background being more from the research and medical side when it comes to your nutritionist, anything that you're seeing right now on the research side that's getting you really excited, or something you're kind of wanting other people to know in terms of what's going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, the field in general is actually making this like massive change where we're starting to understand not what we think is good for us from a health and performance point of view, but what we know is good from a health and performance point of view. Nutrition has been studied for so long, and it's been just a terrible, terrible field of poorly designed studies that the media overinterprets. But people like Alan Aragon, Brad Schoenfield, and a bunch of others are starting to actually put out some really great research to say, how big should your calorie deficit be if you want to lose weight? And so this is one area that I kind of wanted to touch upon. So there was this really recent study, maybe about 12 months ago, called the Matador study. It has nothing to do with bullfighting. Sorry, Chad. I didn't mean to get you all excited. But what they did...
I was ready.
I know. So they took these two groups, and they used obese men because that's a really easy population to work with, and there's a lot of them around. And they put one group on traditional diet, so just constant caloric restriction of about 33%. And let's be clear, 33% is miserable. So if you have a 2,000 calorie diet, you're now eating roughly 1,333 calories instead. So painful. And so they used that group as sort of their control. And they took a second group of people and they said, we're going to put these guys on an intermittent energy restriction diet. So nothing to do with intermittent fasting. What they did is they did 2 weeks of calorie restriction, 2 weeks at calorie maintenance. So we'll say a 2,000 calorie diet person. So they did 2 weeks at 1,333, 2 weeks at 2,000. And then they started to adjust for these people as they lost weight over time. And what they showed was that the people that went through this, intermittent energy restriction state had ended up with better long-term weight loss, less adaptive thermogenesis, meaning their metabolisms were in a better state than the group that went through traditional dieting. And so this is using like pure science to figure out a better approach to dieting. And it actually means that you get to take a break. So compliance is better at the end of the day as well. So this was a huge win for the nutritional field. A lot more studies need to be done. Is 2 weeks and 2 weeks what you need to do? Is a 33% deficit the right approach or not? But it's a huge step forward to show you don't just need to be in a diet 24/7, 365 to make progress. And so that study to me was like game changing. We immediately made changes within our company about how we approached, weight loss clients and things like that. And we've seen nothing but success with it since then.
Well, for first off, there 33% seems pretty significant of a drop off. I mean that's huge.
For sure.
I don't know if I can handle something like that.
The people that were in this study, were like basically being monitored, had access to a nutritionist like every day of the week, and that's pretty much the only way you're going to live in a 33% calorie deficit, short of having amazing willpower. So we adapted that approach. We've changed a few parameters. 20% calorie deficits. We changed the length of the cut in the maintenance period a little bit to be a little bit more in the favor of what we think is appropriate. And we're still seeing results. But yeah, the first thing we did was get away from 33%.
And the other thing you mentioned in there is, specific diets. And I'm not a fan of the word diet. I don't think that that's conducive to longevity. Anything that you're trying to get someone to do, from my perspective, should be a lifestyle change, and I'm assuming that you're in that same boat. And when it comes to these
100%.
things, right? I mean, it's got to be something like, do you envision someone cutting back 33% as being sustainable for them? Do you think that that's something 5 years from now they're going to be able to do? It's most likely something that they can kind of say, okay, I can actually incorporate this into a lifestyle 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now.
100%. So, diet. People associate the word diet and say diet means like calorie restriction, right? That's what most people think of if I say, what does the word diet mean? And diet actually comes from the Greek word, which I think means like a new lifestyle or something like that, which I think is exactly what you're getting at. So, fun fact, basically every contestant that's gone to The Biggest Loser and lost, 70, 100 pounds has gained all of it back. Like basically all of them. Why? They're not learning lifestyle changes. And so if you want to make if you want to see changes in your body composition, your health, your performance, extreme approaches just don't work. Using some, in my opinion, this is going to be a little bit contentious, using some app that tells you exactly how much to eat for every single meal of the day and doesn't let you go out to restaurants and make good decisions that are still in line with your diet, even though you have no idea how many calories are in it, doesn't work. And so you have to kind of look at like the big picture and say, what am I willing to change to achieve my goals? If your sleep is a disaster, the chances of you sticking with your diet are basically slim to none. I just went through a phase with, we've got a 7-month-old baby now. Like we didn't get very much sleep at all. I can tell you, I didn't give a rat's ass what I was eating for about 3 months of that. It was about survival, And so if you're not willing to put effort into changing your sleep pattern, changing your stresses, exercising in some form or another, even though it may not be great for weight loss, but ultimately just aligning your actions with your goals, then the chances of you realizing long-term progress are basically slim to none. I like to say extreme approaches never work. It's sort of actually, Dave, when I talk about this at Power Monkey, I use your handstand as a progression, like as an example, right? Like, could you just simply put somebody in a handstand and have them do a push-up? Like if they had some decent skill and get it done relatively quickly? The answer is undoubtedly yes. But ultimately, they're probably going to hurt themselves and they're not going to make the progress that they want to make with their skill development. It's the exact same thing with nutrition. I could probably just toss people into extreme calorie deficits. We would see about 50% of them lose weight. The other 50% would bail on the whole thing from to begin with, Would they make long-term progress? No. At some point, they're either going to get too hungry and they're going to stop, or their body's going to adapt and they're going to hit a plateau. And then the question is, well, what do I do now? Right. And I think this is the approach that many companies out there, not within the CrossFit space, but just globally, they do. They put people into such extreme approaches that they generate, 3-month progress photos that look amazing, that they could put on their social media page, that result in another, 500 people signing up for their program. And 3 months later, those people are back to the weight that they were, or worse, heavier, right? But who cares, because we've got new clients coming to the door and money looks great right now. And so, I see that business model and I have no interest in it. I have no interest in it. Everything that we do is about long-term progress, real lifestyle changes, because those are the only things that are going to work long-term. I want to teach you how to, how to make your nutrition choices for the rest of your life. Just in the same way that, Chad wants to teach somebody to squat for the rest of their life, or you want to teach somebody, how to do handstands for the rest of their life. Like, there's a right way to do it, and then there's the easy way to do it. And they're not the same thing.
Yeah, kind of building on that, Mike, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the study where they went for 2 weeks at that 33% deficit, and then they went back to their normal. So kind of the way that you put it is they have a break in there. That was very interesting to me, and it reminded me of instances where I've worked with athletes for a long period of time, and we're in there in the gym on a regular basis, and we're hammering our way, and things are going good. We're improving technique, we're improving strength, and we're getting better. And then a competition comes around, and then they're out of the gym for 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks, maybe even longer for some of them that are that have something in their life going on. But it's always been interesting to me after those, that 1 week or however long it was, when they come back, not only did they not forget how to move, they actually, from the very first day after that break, are magically and kind of to my eye moving better.
Right.
So it's definitely interesting how the mind and the body works, and it kind of sounds to me like it's similar to, and tell me if I'm wrong here. It sounds very similar to the way that we train our body to get stronger. Is ideally you push for a certain amount of time. In weightlifting, we like to go 2 weeks, maybe 3, and then we back off a little bit for 1 week, for example. So
Right.
I've always used kind of a push, or a heavy
Yep.
light principle in regards to week. Is that a good comparison to make?
It is a good comparison to make. In your case, you're looking for, compensation effects and things like that. In this case, what we're trying to avoid is something called adaptive thermogenesis. So basically, to make a complicated term relatively simple, we know that your metabolism is going to slow down as you lose weight. There's simply less of you. So your metabolic rate is lower. You're eating less food, so your thermic effect of food is lower. And then there's some adaptations that occur that we don't expect. And so let's say Dave's doing a diet and his metabolism is now 1,800 calories when we expected it to be 2,000 calories. That difference we call adaptive thermogenesis. And so when you take these, diet breaks or these periods out of caloric restriction, what's happening is you're restoring your metabolic health and you're preventing adaptive thermogenesis. It's just like, I think, weightlifting, where you're allowing for compensation effects to occur. Maybe you're also allowing for decreased neurological restrictions from building up and things that are protecting the body from a different point of view. But ultimately, the principle seems very similar.
Yeah, I definitely just had a light bulb moment there, Mike. I never looked at nutrition in that way at all, and it makes so much sense. And I think I'll be able to kind of use that for myself and maybe recommend to some other athletes moving forward. Better yet, I'll probably just send them your way if I really need to. But
For sure.
we've covered a lot already, Mike, and I think the listeners already are going to get so much out of this. But I always want to make sure that we kind of recap, so to speak, and
Sure.
summarize. Can you just, even if it's some of the same stuff that we went over, can you kind of summarize and go over maybe your 3 top quick tips for helping people improve their nutrition?
Yeah. So, top 3 tips for improving nutrition. One has nothing to do with nutrition directly. It's sleep. I honestly believe there's nothing that you can do more importantly in your life, regardless of whether or not you're trying to improve your nutrition, your overhead squat, your gymnastics, your 5 mile time, your happiness, your ability to be a mom, etc., than sleep. It's probably the most important thing that you can do. 7 hours minimum a night is everyone's goal. And I know that's hard for some people, but just make it an attitude in your life that you're going to make sleep the biggest priority besides, what you need to do to survive, and you'll be better at everything else in your life. Two would be to focus on long-term progressions. Don't buy into programs that promise immediate results that say in even 8 weeks you're going to be a totally different person or anything like that. Extremes almost never work. You've got to operate with things that you can do for more than 2 to 3 months. Otherwise, you're just going to end up back where you are today. And then number three would be to create a good social network around yourself that's supportive. It's really, really, really hard to make these changes. It's damn near impossible to do it if people are giving you shit about it and tearing you down along the way. Find people that are supportive of you and your goals, and everything's going to be 1,000 times easier to achieve. So those would probably be the top three.
All right, so one of the things that's happened recently, Mike, that I know you're pretty excited about is the new baby in your life. You had a new daughter.
Yeah,
you said you mentioned it earlier, 7 months ago, and I'm just kind of curious how that's been going. How's it being a dad?
It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life, for sure, but also the most rewarding, for sure, as well. Literally nothing can prepare you for that change, to say the least. We tried really, really hard, and we're still just completely overwhelmed by the experience. And every day is like trying to do a puzzle where somebody keeps changing the puzzle pieces on you, and that's the best analogy I can probably use.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually a really good way to put it. You mentioned the importance of sleep, in the last little segment there, which I was asking you, the top priority in life in terms of well-being, nutrition, being healthier, sleep. Throw a baby into the mix, everything goes out the window with sleep. How's your sleep patterns been lately over the past 7 months?
They were brutal for quite a while. Fun little fact about our daughter is that for whatever reason, she hates bottles and drinking milk from them unless she's sound asleep. And so she essentially would only eat while taking naps, essentially, or at nighttime. And so that's really hard to do, of course, when she's at daycare. And so a lot of the feeding that we had to do ended up taking place when she would come home at roughly 5 o'clock until she was satisfied. And so we had a lot of long nights there for a while. But thankfully, at this point, she's eating real foods and she's gotten a little bit better about the bottle. And so we've actually had about 2 weeks, knock on wood, of solid sleep here. And we're trending in the right direction is the best way I can say it.
Changed your life again, right? When you start to get those chunks of sleep back again, you're like, oh my God, I never knew what I had before this. You start to get your life back again. Right. It's amazing.
So much more energy in the last 2 weeks than I've had for the past 6 months. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Mike, I always enjoy hearing kind of people's backgrounds and major life events or circumstances or tragedies that people have gone through that lead them to overcome and really lead them to be the person that they are. And so you were adopted, and being adopted, I'm curious to know what it's like to come out of that situation and be a parent and have that type of relationship with another human being.
Oh, completely. So I was adopted when I was a baby. So I was in a foster home for about 2 months before, being with my parents, and I consider my adopted parents my parents' parents. And so, that definitely shaped my experience. Like you guys were talking about earlier about never wanting to be wrong. Well, when I was a kid, I never wanted to be the bad kid because I think subconsciously was constantly thinking, well, hey, they could give me up again. And of course, that was never, ever going to happen. But, subconsciously, I think it has a huge impact on things. And so now sort of having, a daughter of our own, I think it's probably sort of impacted it's impacted me from the point of view of sort of, understanding to an extent. It's freaking hard raising a kid. And so, to expect that or to have the foresight to know that you're not mentally, emotionally, and physically ready to make that happen and put the health and the betterment of that child above your own health and benefit is a huge, huge thing to do and really, 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 really hard. And so it gave me perspective to some extent on like, you know, what that person must have been thinking about in that moment, as opposed to all the things that I had imagined for, you know, many years, what the reasons were, which are all negative. Now it just comes down to a different thing entirely, and it's all about love, you know, no surprise there.
Yeah, absolutely, and that could be a whole other podcast in itself, I
Oh
think,
my
Mike, to
gosh.
dig into that a little bit more. But one of the things for you is that you try to impress on people is you don't need to look a certain way
Hmm.
to deserve love and happiness, and that's kind of become a theme of your coaching, I know. So, do you think that your experience being adopted and going through those thoughts through your life and overcoming that has led to that?
I wouldn't say necessarily the adoption per se directly, but it's sort of indirectly for sure. You know, I think to an extent, thinking about self acceptance and finding intrinsic value, um, is something that was a journey for me, right? You know, it wasn't about being right or wrong. It wasn't about being able to be the smart person in the room. It was just about being myself and, you know, being, you know, a quote good person, and being somebody that made other people feel good about themselves. And that's an intrinsic characteristic that all of us have, you know. And so, you know, when somebody comes to us as a nutrition company, like it's usually because something in their life isn't going the way that they want it to, and um, maybe that's an aesthetics thing. They don't feel like they look the way that they need to for people to accept them. Maybe, you know, it's a performance thing. They have to be, you know, a national level weightlifter or, you know, a sanctional level CrossFit Games athlete before they're going to get the respect that they deserve. And typically, when they find those things, they actually don't end up being happy, or those happiness moments are fleeting. You know, I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten people to an aesthetic goal that they want, and they get there and they're like, "Man, this this wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to be happy when I got here, and it turns out that it wasn't. It wasn't about abs. It wasn't about, you know, a six pack or, you know, a defined upper back, or it wasn't about a 100 kilo snatch. It was about something deeper." And so, you know, with the nutrition coaching that we do, we try to dive deeper into those topics and really figure out like what's somebody's motivation and what do they need to change for them to find happiness in their life. And oftentimes it means that they get to, you know, spend more time with their friends. They get to find more balance in their nutrition. They get to have, you know, they have to have some really hard conversations, but at the end of the day, it allows for significant progress towards happiness. And that's really what we're trying to do, even though it's all disguised under nutrition coaching.
I mean,
Yeah,
I find that to
Dave.
be, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, from my perspective, it's one of the reasons why I love having you on board with us, Mike. I mean, you being part of our Power Monkey team and being the resource that we look to from a nutritional standpoint, it just fits in so well with the way that we look at coaching, you know, our sports as well. And it's taking a holistic view at the person, not just trying to get them that 100 kilo snatch or that, you know, that handstand push up, whatever it might be, but saying,
Right.
okay, what do we need to look at here to make you a better person all the way around? And maybe that approach will allow you to get those other things a little bit more easily. And I
Totally.
think you fitting in from that perspective, just it's one of the reasons why you being part of our team just makes sense.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Uh, so for any of the listeners out there, Mike, that kind of have enjoyed your approach here and want to get started, can you point them in the right direction, just in regards to getting started with their nutrition or even getting in touch with M2 Nutrition if that's what they want to do?
Yeah, for sure. So I do own M2 Performance Nutrition, and that's probably the best way to kind of find out more about me and what we do. So we have a website, we have an Instagram page, we have an extensive blog with a lot of posts that kind of dive into topics like we were just talking about. Um, those are places that I would say go read those posts, go find out who we are, and if that approach resonates with you, then reach out through the website, or you can contact me directly through my Instagram handle, which has been down here on the lower left side of my video box the whole time. Um, I will definitely respond to you. I will, you know, reach out, and we'll figure out what the right approach to kind of get you headed on your path towards happiness is, whether that's nutrition or some other aspect of your life that we can help, you know, put in alignment with your goals. We're there to do it for you.
Fantastic, Mike. All right, we're coming towards the last couple of questions here. This one is very important to both Chad and I, and we have a running tally as to this question. And
oh boy!
Before you answered,
I'm one up today already.
Yeah, you can't throw in your own separate questions and expect those to count for anything. But just remember, Mike, before you answer, who is the one that's as big of a Top Gun fan as you are, and that's me. All right. So just before you answer the question, all right. What sport or discipline is better, gymnastics or weightlifting?
Ooh, better? Oh, man. Chad, you're going to kill me. I got to go with gymnastics.
What are you saying?
Oh, is that because of your rock climbing background?
I think it's only because of the rock climbing thing, Chad. I am so sorry. But, man, yeah, the big, thick legs don't go up a wall real easy. But the upper body, strength helps in a big way. So, I'm going to whisper really, really softly gymnastics over here.
That's right.
I mean,
thank you,
Mike. I can respect that. I mean, I hate to lose, but I'm going to go back and take my win of you liking beer today. That's what I'm going to dwell on.
I think you knew that Mike was going to say gymnastics there, so you threw in another question early just to get an early win.
No, you're right. I mean, the thing is, I can't even get Mike Service to say weightlifting. He gave us a politician answer and said, and said that they were a tie.
You have to ask the weight of the question, right? Like, so what's like the weight? On a scale from 1 to 10, how important to your listeners is the question beer versus wine versus weightlifting versus gymnastics? And I feel like it's skewed heavily in the beer wine question. So.
Oh yes, absolutely. So. Mike, we also like to finish up with a little game, and we have a few different ones that we play. But the one we're going to go with today, if you're okay with entertaining us here, is rapid fire questions, and we'll do 3 quick questions, and your job is just to kind of answer without thinking a whole lot, and let's see what comes out.
All right, I'll give it my best effort.
All right, let's see it. So what we have here is, who is your favorite superhero and why?
Superman. He can do basically everything.
Superman. Okay. You might have some challengers to that. I think, Batman versus Superman kind of thing, right? All right. Here's an interesting one that we haven't asked anyone yet. If you could be any flavor of ice cream, what ice cream flavor would it be and why?
Any flavor of ice cream. I like black raspberry. It's sweet and a little sour at the same time.
Black raspberry, is that what you said?
Black raspberry, sweet and a little sour at the same time.
I've never tried that one. I'll have to give it a try. Didn't you say something about raspberries earlier?
Yeah, about really high in fiber.
There you go.
Good for your.
Maybe I can eat black raspberry ice cream and then go drink beer. That's what I'm gonna do. Camp every day.
Chad, you and I will run an experiment at camp in May, and we'll see how it goes. Sound good?
I'm up for it. Hey, I was going to ask you anyway, how in the world do I get into one of those experiments of the science of boozing? I'd love to do that. I'll do that for free all day long.
You know it, man.
All right, last one here. Who is your favorite cartoon character and why?
Oh, favorite cartoon character. Rapid fire. I am a big fan of Family Guy and Brian from Family Guy. I think he's hysterical. So he's a dog, and just always loved him.
A+ on that answer. He's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a good one for sure. Dave, do you have any last minute words for Mike here before we shut it down?
Not at all. Mike, thanks so much for coming on, and I think we'll have to do a part 2 once Maverick comes out, and we'll recap that and do just a little secondary podcast review and the whole thing.
I can't think of anything better than talking an hour about Top Gun. So let's make that happen.
We'll do it shirtless with volleyballs as well, just to make sure it's very authentic. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm not going to be on that one because I don't want to stand next to you guys shirtless. Both of you guys are a little bit too jacked for me. Unless they can look at my quads, maybe we just have a picture of my quads on there. But yeah, Mike, it's certainly been a pleasure chatting with you. I know the listeners are going to get a whole lot out of that. And you guys listening back home, be sure to head over to PowerMonkeyFitness.com for services and upcoming events. Check out our Instagram pages as well for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, also at Dave Durante and at Ollie Chad. We'd love to hear from you guys as well. You can always leave us a rating or review wherever you're getting your podcast. Also, let us know if there's any content you want us to cover or questions you have. You can request those by sending us an email to podcast@powermonkeyfitness.com. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durrani, and until next time, thank you all for listening.